The judge's stand. The moment I swung open the front door and saw my wife, Ellen, crumpled on the gravel driveway, her hands trembling, blood streaking her cheek, and her wrist bent at an unnatural angle, something inside me broke. Not in a loud, shattering way, but in a quiet, permanent one. She wasn't crying. That was the worst part. Her eyes were wide, her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but all I heard was the shallow rasp of her breath, fighting to stay even. Behind her, parked at the edge of our private ranch road, were two HOA enforcers clipboard-toting bullies, posing as lawmen sipping coffee from paper cups like they hadn't just laid hands on a woman who'd once stitched soldiers back together in a desert hospital tent. That was the moment I stopped being the steady, small-town judge everyone in Grayson County knew and became something else. Something colder, sharper, ready to carve justice from chaos. But to understand how we got here, how a petty neighborhood dispute spiraled into a war, how these HOA goons picked the one man in the county they should have never crossed, you need to go back 3 weeks, to the first time I noticed the white pickup truck lurking at the edge of my property. It was a crisp September morning, the kind where the mountain air smells like pine and promise. I'd just finished my coffee when I spotted the truck, half hidden by the aspens, its nose angled like it was trying to blend in. At first, I figured it was lost hikers. Our corner of the Rockies gets plenty of city folks chasing trails that don't exist. But the next day, it was back. This time, I saw binoculars on the dash and an HOA magnet slapped on the door like a cheap badge. I should have taken it seriously then. Ellen warned me. She'd heard whispers that the HOA, under its new president, Marjorie Wells, had turned into something meaner, hiring private muscle to clean up the mountain. Our lakeside cabin, with its solar panels, horse barn, and Ellen's wind chimes tinkling on the porch, was too much freedom for their rulebook. I brushed it off. I was a judge, drowning in real cases, not neighborhood drama. I should have listened. The trouble escalated with a clang. Not a knock, but the sound of a metal clipboard smashing into our mailbox, denting the aluminum and scattering papers across the gravel. Ellen retrieved them. Violation notices for unapproved structures and non-regulation fencing. It was laughable. I'd built that fence myself, using timber from the land I'd rezoned as county judge. I sent Marjorie a letter, polite but firm, with copies of our deeds and exemptions signed by me, no less. They ignored it. Then came the drone. Ellen was feeding the horses when it buzzed over, low and aggressive, like a hornet. She waved it off, then chucked a rake at it. The thing crash-landed in our duck pond. That's when I filed a report, not as a neighbor, but as a judge. I thought it would end there. It didn't. 2 days later, while I was in court settling a land dispute between two ranchers, my phone buzzed. Ellen was in the ER. My world tilted. The nurses said 2 HOA enforcers showed up at the cabin mid-morning while Ellen was alone. They claimed they were checking a non-conforming structure, a chicken coop Ellen had painted with our grandniece. When she told them they had no authority and to leave, one shoved her into the gatepost. The other tossed her phone into the bushes. She screamed, but they were gone before the sheriff arrived, leaving her bruised, bleeding, and alone on the ground. I've never driven faster. When I pulled up and saw Ellen sitting there, refusing a stretcher, her pride battered but unbroken, I knew this wasn't about fences or bylaws anymore. This was about power, someone mistaking our quiet life for weakness. They didn't know who I was. Not arrogance, just fact. They didn't know I'd written 3 of the ordinances they tried to weaponize. They didn't know I owned every acre of this ridge, from the lake to the power lines. They didn't know I had 10 years of HOA meeting transcripts, or that Ellen, a former combat nurse, documented everything, even in pain. They thought they could play vigilante on my land. I decided it was time to show them the difference between authority and pretense. I called a meeting not with the HOA, they'd dodge it, but with the sheriff, the county clerk, the mayor's aide, and the zoning board chair. We sat on my back porch, the lake glittering below. I poured coffee. Ellen laid out evidence, photos, notices, and the drone's wreckage. We began dismantling the HOA's empire, quietly, legally, relentlessly. The first time I faced the enforcers was at a Firehouse Pancake fundraiser, where irony was as thick as the syrup. They strutted in, wearing tactical vests like they were raiding a cartel, not policing mailbox colors. One, a wiry guy with a weak chin, stared me down. The other, stocky with a buzz cut and mirrored sunglasses, gave a smug nod. I stayed seated, sipped my coffee, and watched them parade their fake badges. They weren't real HOA staff, just hired thugs Marjorie sent to enforce unratified bylaws. Their paperwork was a joke, their firm unlicensed, their authority void under state law. After Ellen's assault, I traced every thread of their operation and found it rotting with illegality. Their trespassing was actionable, their attack was battery. But I didn't confront them yet. Timing is everything. I let them dig deeper. They did, taping new violations to our gate with duct tape, citing unauthorized livestock interaction for our goats and visual disruption for a scarecrow Ellen dressed in a bathrobe, holding a sign. Don't make me call the judge. It was petty. It was perfect. Every move they made thickened my file. The sheriff, an old friend who'd known Ellen since her hospital days, was livid when he heard the details. They never filed security permits, he said, arms crossed. You want them gone? I said not yet. I wanted them to be documented, confident, thinking they were untouchable. While they played cowboy, I drafted a cease and desist order, backed by civil code and an injunction so tight it could choke their operation. Marjorie's next move was a speech at the HOA's gazebo, beside a pond she'd tried to rebrand as Memorial Wetlands. She preached about order, casting us as threats to her vision. I waved, clapped even. She didn't know her enforcers were being filmed by a county investigator, harassing a widow over her garage paint. The final straw was a notice nailed into a century-old pine on our lawn, heritage protected, untouchable. Ellen snapped a photo, smirking despite her sling. We'll frame this next to the summons. I filed for a protection order, attached the photo, and dropped the case on the mayor's desk. That afternoon, I sent Marjorie a certified letter, civil but brutal, listing every infraction, every threat, every overreach, copied to the board, sheriff, zoning commission, and the local paper. Silence followed, as it always does when bullies face real law. But Marjorie didn't quit. The next morning, Ellen found a voicemail from a blocked number. A man's voice, smug and threatening. Think twice before embarrassing people with power. Next time, we knock before we push. It was a confession referencing Ellen's assault. I traced it to one of the enforcers and sent it to the DA with a harassment and assault investigation request. By noon, my assistant, Clara, had pulled every relevant ruling I'd made on property law. We built a case, surgical and personal. Ellen couldn't sleep that night, jumping at every creak. I showed her the new floodlights, reinforced gate, and cameras I'd installed with help from a state police friend. Her shoulders eased, not fully, but enough. Then came a break. Tom, an HOA board member I'd met years ago, emailed for an off-record meeting. At a diner outside town, he looked paranoid, glancing over his shoulder. I didn't sign up for this, he said, handing me a USB of unratified bylaws, shady financials, and Marjorie's emails calling residents enemies, and our cabin the outlaw camp. He said the board was scared, that Marjorie's fury drove compliance. Ellen's assault cracked their loyalty. You're the only one who can stop her legally, he said. The emails were worse than I'd imagined. Marjorie mocked elderly homeowners, joked about accidental lawsuits, to silence dissent. I forwarded everything to county council, requesting an emergency injunction. Ellen filed a civil suit for assault and distress. The sheriff raided Marjorie's compliance office, her basement, stuffed with files and a whiteboard listing high-risk residents, our names at the top. The news exploded. Judge sues HOA over assault, fraud. Residents formed a coalition. Ellen and I attended their first meeting, sitting quietly as neighbors thanked her for fighting. A widow shared her own story of enforcer harassment. A veteran offered doctored drone footage. Our fight became theirs. I amended the suit into a class action claim. Marjorie's lawyer, a greasy type with too much hair gel, tried dismissing Ellen's trauma as subjective. Ellen stood in court, read her medical report signed by two specialists, and sat down without a glance. The judge's gavel slammed. The hearing was set. One enforcer fled, the other blamed Marjorie. Then came a chilling anonymous letter. A photo of our cabin, windows circled in red, with the note, "This isn't over. Stay inside." Ellen tossed it into the fireplace. I reported it. The sheriff upped patrols. The state oversight board subpoenaed Marjorie, finding mismanagement and code violations in Tom's files. Her power crumbled not with drama, but with silence. Neighbors stopped waving. Her emails went unanswered. The hearing arrived under a foggy dawn. The courtroom buzzed with residents, officials, and reporters. Ellen took the stand, her voice steady, recounting the assault with devastating clarity. The recordings, emails, and photos painted a damning picture. The remaining enforcer admitted Marjorie lied about their authority. The state officer confirmed 6 code violations. The judge ruled. The HOA's actions were illegal. The board dissolved, Marjorie was fined, and Ellen was awarded damages and an apology. Weeks later, the ridge felt lighter, like the land itself exhaled. Marjorie sold her cabin to a young family with kids and a Great Dane. Ellen baked them a pie. I helped move their stove. Life resumed, slow and steady. Ellen started helping neighbors understand their rights, not as a crusader, but over coffee by the lake. I stayed on the sidelines, watching the new HOA form with honest voices. The county asked me to speak at a seminar. I declined. The legacy wasn't in headlines, but in knowing I hadn't failed Ellen. We'd chosen clarity over chaos, strength over fear. Ellen took down the scarecrow and hung a birdhouse with a welcome sign. The war was over. The land was ours, not because we won, but because it was always home. No clipboard tyrant or fake badge could steal that. What do you think about this story? Have you ever faced injustice or bullying in your community? How do you feel about using violence or legal power to fight back? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your perspective and what you do in a situation like this. Let's start a conversation about standing up for what's right.